Welcome everyone to this session of Infotouch University Online, where we go in depth into various features of our point of sale products, Storekeeper POS, and Store Manager. Today's topic has to do with how do we fix mistakes that are made, and those mistakes might be things rung incorrectly at the point of sale, or perhaps a customer made a mistake and bought the wrong size of a piece of clothing, or maybe they just changed their mind. So today's topic is how are we fix things up, basically, and we have 3 different ways that you can do that: post voids, exchanges, and return sales. There is no difference, by the way, in how the 2 POS products handle these functions. Okay, so we're going to start out, let's talk about post voids to begin with. So when you make a sale in our system and it's tendered, receipt prints, at that point, that sale is considered sacrosanct. We maintain that sale in our invoice database forever, and we don't let you touch it. So one of the things that does come up from time to time is people want to make sales and then kind of just get rid of them and make them go away because they don't want to pay the tax man. We don't provide any support for that. We want to make sure that the software we provide is maintaining an honest and accurate account of what happened in the store, and so that store owner can be fully confident that if the tax man calls, he has all the records he needs to show that he's been doing things by the book. But there is one thing that we can do. So let's say a customer comes in, buys a few things, and the person at the point of sale rings it up, and they accidentally use the wrong tender type. And they say, oh crud, my cash drawer is going to be off because I selected check instead of cash. What we can do is what's called post-voiding a sale. With post-voiding, the sale is still in the system. So we will still see it in the electronic journal, for example, but it undoes the effects of the sale. So all the inventory that has been taken out of stock is returned to stock. All the tender that the customer gave is returned to the customer. If an employee's gotten commission credit for that sale, well, he loses it, which makes sense because what we're doing is basically saying this sale didn't happen. And in my example I just gave, then the clerk can ring up the sale again with the right tender type. Another possibility is that maybe the customer gets halfway out the door of the store and realizes, oh, you know, I really shouldn't have done that. I'm running low on money. Let me just give this back to you. So again, a post void will undo all the effects of a sale while keeping it in the electronic journal. So let's see an example of that. So let's first make a sale. And I have the pet store up today. And I'm just going to ring in a few items by scanning it. So here's some dog food. Here's a flea collar. And I think we have a book here as well. Okay, so we have rung up 3 items, and the clerk hits cash real quick, or let's not even go with the real quick. Let's just say they go ahead and they pay with cash, and we'll go back and use the example of the second if the customer gets his halfway out the door and changes their mind. So here's the sale. Note the invoice number. That is crucial. You cannot post void a sale without knowing its invoice number, and we will not help you because generally, first of all, it's a security issue, and generally we want you to have a receipt or something in front of you that shows you what the sale number is. So customer walks from the door back and says, you know, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. You know, I really can't afford this today. Take this stuff back from me. Let's just pretend this never happened. No problem. We're going to do a post void. Now, post void, like many types of activities in the register, may be in your register button section. And you can always configure these buttons in the register if you need that. In this case, we don't have one, so you can always go to the manager menu, which is not configurable, to get to pretty much any transaction type we support. And there you see post void. And post voids start out with a reason. We want to know why they are doing this. And we're going to record that reason, as we'll see in just a second. So the customer changed their mind. Now, to be doubly secure here, even though we know employee number 1 was in there and rung up the sale, we want to know for sure who is doing this. And we'll just put in number 1 again. Now we need to know the invoice number to post void. Remember, the correct one was 21. If I put in a number, for example, that doesn't exist, I get, well, hey, I can't find this, I can't post void it. Note that there are a variety of reasons why you might not be able to post void a sale. Let's start out, well, besides the obvious one that it never happened, let's start out with the most common one. So as you're ringing up stuff in the store, you get to the end of the shift, and you typically do a shift closeout, which balances your cash drawer and commits the amount of money you've taken during your shift to go to the bank at the end of the day. Once that has occurred, we can no longer post void the invoice because we're not going back and trying to undo the amount of money that's going to the bank or change it. So at the point where you close out the shift or close out the day, you will get a message indicating that, and you cannot post void the shift, that transaction. What you can do at that point is do a return sale, which we will get to later. There are a few other reasons why you may not be able to post void an invoice. For example, you cannot post void an invoice which accepted a debit card or an EBT tender. And that's not because we don't want you to do it, it's because the payment processors don't allow it. So once that money has been withdrawn from their bank or from their EBT account, that's it. There's no way to change that. You also cannot post void an invoice where you activated or reloaded a gift card. And it's kind of for the same reasons, essentially. If you activated, for example, a gift card and put $50 on it, then post voided the invoice and gave the customer their money back, well, somebody's sitting with a $50 gift card still, because we can't undo that either. And finally, a little obscure, but if you do use the receivable side of our software, you can apply payments to invoices. Once that has occurred, that invoice cannot be post-voided either. And unlikely to happen. But let's go ahead now and continue on. And here's invoice number 21, which is the correct number that we just did. And once you put in that number, you get a similar kind of display to recalling a hold sale. We show you the sale on the screen. Are you sure that's what you want to do? And we hit OK, and that's it. So that sale never happened. But I did mention that there's no way to get rid of this out of the electronic journal. So let's take a look at what this looks like. So if we go to the electronic journal and look at today's sales, notice that sale number 21 that we just did, it has a V next to it. So the sale's still in the system and everything looks normal unless you look real carefully at that V, but that V indicates that in fact that sale has been voided and none of these numbers, whether inventory or tender or what have you, are in fact being counted. But it does maintain that audit trail in case somebody comes and wants to check over your books. Let me show you one other flavor of our electronic journal here. Let's switch to select range. This allows us to report over any date range, and I'm going to just limit it to today. And in our electronic journal select range, you have a filters option. So that is normally set to standard. And there's actually two other options here. We can specifically report on tax-exempt sales and on post voids. So let's select that. And you'll see we've done a couple of these today. One earlier practice. In any case, you can see that in addition to getting all of the standard information you get on the electronic journal report, we also have captured the fact who did this post void and the reason. And that stays in the electronic journal. So that's post voids. It's really very straightforward, but just bear in mind there's some limitations. In particular, once a shift or day has passed, post voids are no longer an option. Okay, let's go back to the register and discuss our next topic, which is exchanges. So with exchanges, let's say the customer comes in and they bought a one color of collar for their cat, and they realized that they really didn't like this color, or maybe the significant other didn't like the color, and they wanted to exchange it for a different color. Well, that's not a problem. So let's start out by exchanging one item here. And usually the exchange button is a standard part of the register buttons, but again, these are all configurable, so we can't say for sure, but you'll commonly see it. And when you hit the exchange button, it brings up with a negative quantity, -1 typically. There is an obscure method of having you prompt for the exchange quantity, but most people will just use -1. And now I'm going to ring up the item by scanning or by description or however I might otherwise have done it. So let's scan in an item, and we have exchanged, I can't get the full description. We have the line item employee in there, which is unusual, but being a pet store and they might be scheduling grooming and things in the appointment book, we do need the line item employee for that. So let's take a look, and we see this is a black collar here. Okay, so I rang it up -1, the price is positive, and the total extended amount is negative. Well, this looks the same. I guess this was a bad example, but you can see that we just bought a blue collar instead. That was not exchanged, so the sum total of the transaction right now is 0. Now, there are no restrictions with exchanges as to whether the amount that is exchanged is more or less than the amount that is being purchased. So you can have, for example, let's go ahead and buy a book here on Border Collies, and now the customer owes us money. Conversely, we could exchange in more than we're returning, in which case I would owe money to the customer. There are no reason codes with exchanges, so it's kind of a free-form, quick way to do things. And bear in mind that the exchanged items, in this case the black collar, is going to be returned to your inventory. There's a legitimate case to be made that we ought to put this somewhere else, some new quantity field for the inventory record, to allow somebody to examine it and make sure that the exchanged or returned items are in fact in good condition and ready to sell. We don't do that today. It's on our enhancement list. You can always use the quantity adjustment function in inventory to go ahead and take those items back out of stock if, for example, they're damaged. But today, they're going to go right back into inventory. We pay with cash, and we're done. We looked at the electronic journal again, and let's get rid of the post void filters since we want to see this last transaction. Here's that sale we just did. We gave back the black, bought the blue, and bought a book. Not doing too well for the day here in the store, but I've been doing a lot of return sales and other things. So let's go ahead and go go on to our final topic, which is return sales. So that's it for exchanges. And return sales are quite a bit more complicated. So rather than having something where you are buying and returning something in the same transaction, return sales solely allow you to go ahead and return things. And there's a lot more information recorded with it, a reason code. You have restrictions in terms of amounts potentially, whether you want to recall an original sale. We'll get into all those details. But let's just start off with a standard return sale. And again, by default, you're going to find a return sale button here in the Register Button section. If not, you can always find it in the Manager menu. So we'll use this one. Doesn't really matter which one you use, by the way. And let's say a customer comes in and they bought some collars and they're unhappy with them. They're not up to snuff here. So we'll select Quality Issue, and then we'll go ahead and bring up that item. So unlike exchanges where we had a negative quantity and a positive price with an extended amount is negative, return sales reverse this. The quantity is positive, the price is negative. Still, the extended amount is negative, but it's a good way to be able to tell whether a return sale was used or an exchange. Let's go ahead and tender this out now. And in all cases with exchanges, you ring up the transaction exactly, and I mean exactly, as you would as if it was a normal sale. So if you get prompted for a price for a line item, for example, you don't put it in a negative number. In fact, you can't put it in a negative number. You put in a positive number, and we will make it negative for you. Similarly, with tendering, again, you're going to put in a positive number, and we'll make it negative. So let's say we have a store credit tender that we're going to use for giving the customer their money back. That's kind of a nice little thing because we go ahead at that point and make them come back and spend the money in the store, even though they got the credit for it. There's a couple of different types of store credits you can use with our system. This one here is simply a straight tender type with no verification or validation or what have you. Just give me a number, I'm going to track it. The way that the customer gets their money back at that point, because we haven't even linked this sale to a customer, is the receipt is basically their credit. So they would bring that receipt back at a later time, and the clerk would look at it and say, oh, okay, so you got a credit for $4.23. And then they would use the same store credit tender to undo that. In a regular transaction, rather than being made negative, store credit would be a positive number. The other kind of store credit that's a lot more secure and makes sure that the customer is not fooling the store in any way, shape, or form is the customer store credit certificate. And that's not a subject for today, but I'll just mention that. It's a way of essentially having a special certificate, gift certificate in the system linked to the customer record. You would have to tie this to the customer, but at that point, the store credit would be maintained by the system, and as they used up that store credit, we would keep track of it. This kind of store credit here is just whatever the person puts in is fine with us. Okay. So we just made a refund or a return sale. The terms seem to be used interchangeably in our marketplace. Let's go back to, and I'm going to switch to today's here for a second. So there's that return sale at the top. The today's version, by the way, in the electronic journal, prints sales from the most recent back to whatever the end of the beginning of the day was. Whereas the select range does it the other way around. It does it from the from date to the to date. Okay, so we just returned that black collar, and they paid for it with store credit. Suppose I wanted to just take a look at my return sales. Turns out that there's another way. There's a way to do that right here in the electronic journal again. It's part of our filtering option under Select Range. And the trick here is to put a negative number. So you notice we have a from to amount in the filters, as well as the tender type used, the register it was made at, and the employee. But in this case, if we put in a to amount of minus a penny, that means we're reporting on all sales, however small they are, including negative $1,000 or what have you, up to minus a penny. In other words, anything where the customer got money back, which would be not only return sales typically, but also it would be for exchanges where the amount returned exceeded the amount bought. And here we have a few of those transactions. There's the one we just did, and these are all the exchanges we've done for the day. Excuse me. Actually, in this case, all of these are return sales, and you can tell that because the price is negative. Quantities are positive. The register detail report, by the way, also captures information about post voids and return sales, and it does it over a date range maintained by the system. So here's the couple of post voids we did earlier, and here's the return sales we did, including this quality issue we just did earlier. So that information is captured and maintained. There is no equivalent of a return sale special version of the electronic journal today that shows you the description or the reason, but you can always find it here in the register detail report. Like exchanges, the inventory that is returned is directly returned to your inventory, so your quantities on hand go up. Okay, let's finish off with some examples of different ways we handle options with return sales, because there are quite a few. Let's take a look at those. Let's take a look at the options in setup. And it's one of those miscellaneous things. It happens to be under miscellaneous 6. Right at the top, you've got a bunch of options, and we're going to go over those now. The first thing you can see is that you can set up security to limit return sales. So what this is saying here, for example, is if the return sale amount is $100 or more, I'm going to make you put in the assistant manager password or any of the other ones. And you can change these, including to none. That's, in fact, the default. It'll be none. And if that's the case, then we don't care how much the return sale is for, but you can go ahead and specify a password level here and an amount. So you notice before, when we did the return sale for a smaller amount, we didn't see a password prompt. Let's go back and do a return sale again. And we're going to ring up something or other here. Some dog food. Okay. And if I try to refund this now, you notice it lets me do that because $30 is less than $100. Let's go ahead and make this a bigger number now. Now we're over 100, and when we try to tender it, I need a password. And it's got to be that assistant manager password or higher in this case in order to finish the transaction. So you can set up the stores to take a smaller refund without calling anybody over, but a manager or some person with more authority may need to come over for those higher amounts. Another option that you see here, by the way, is forcing the tender. We have not done that yet, but you can, for example, force any return sale to your store credit tender. Therefore, the person at the point of sale, even if they're not well trained, may not understand that they're supposed to only give the customer their money back in terms of store credit. The system will force it on you. Okay, finally, I want to go over, there's a set of features here concerning, and I'm going to undo this here for now, concerning prompting for the original sale. So as we've done returns right now, it's just letting me ring up whatever I like, and whether the customer has been here before is of no concern. But a lot of stores don't want to do that. They want to make sure that if they're taking a return from a customer, that customer has already been to the store and typically has produced a receipt with an invoice number on it that we can then use to recall and make sure that what they're returning is in fact what we want to do. So I'm going to change this from prompt for original sale, no. Yes means we will yes means that we will recall the sale for you, but allow you to ring up items that were not in the original sale as part of the refund. Restrict is probably more commonly used, and with restrict, you cannot refund to that customer anything that they did not buy in the original sale. There's some more options here in terms of security level in case they don't know the original sale. We'll see that in a second. And a prompt for return to original card. So even if I had, for example, my tender set to force you to return things to the store credit tender, once we recall the transaction, we may realize, hey, they paid this thing with a Visa card. I don't mind giving them their money back on their Visa card. So we will, at that point, as we complete the sale, allow them to put the money back on that original credit card. Now, per PCI, in the way we have implemented it, we don't store that credit card number. So all we're going to do is prompt them for a Visa card or an American Express or what have you. But that is an option that people typically let you do. If you go to Home Depot or Walmart or what have you, they very frequently will let you put that credit back on the original card that was sold to. In fact, they typically store it, and we may do that going down the line, but PCI is very fussy about that kind of thing, and we just assume not do that for now. Okay, so I'm gonna still switch this back to no, and I'm only going to try and save this, except, of course, when you make setup option changes, you cannot save them. You can make all the changes you like, but they won't be saved until everyone backs out of the system, and that's to ensure that everybody's playing from the same set of rules. So let's go ahead and close out. We'll just clear this sale out and exit the register. And also we need to exit the Transaction Manager module, and now we can save. So let's go back to the register. This is kind of a big vertical, lots and lots of buttons, so it'll take a few seconds here to load. And then we'll see how the system's going to behave differently as we do a return sale with the new options. All right, we're in. Okay, let's go ahead and do a sale real quick so we have a sale number to return to. So I'll ring up my dog food again, and my flea collar, and my book, what the heck. And we'll just pay with cash, and that invoice number is now 24. Okay, so now we're going to return that. And of course, we've done this one right after the other, but return sales, even if you recall the original sale, have no limitations like post voids because we've already taken that money, we've deposited in the bank. We're not going to try and undo anything. We're simply going to give that customer money back in this shift and in this day. So return sale still starts off with the reason code. Why? Now we get the recall original sale. Okay, and I'm going to say no for a second, and you'll notice it's now going and asking me for a password. Let's go back and look at those setup options for a second. That's this one we see here. So on the security to find the original sale, what we're saying here is that if you don't want to recall the original sale, if you want to do the same kind of ad hoc returns that we did earlier, I may need a password of whatever level I specify. I may not need a password. I might just simply say, nope, you can't do it. Sorry, don't have no receipt. I can't take your refund. So right now, back in the register, that's what it's asking for. So if I put in the System Manager password, it's letting me go back to do the same kind of return sale that we saw earlier. I don't want to do that. I just wanted to show that to you. And now we'll say, okay, let's go ahead and do that return. And what we're going to do is we're set to restrict. That means that the only things we could return are items in the original sale. So that number was 24. That's the sale we made. It brings it up for you and converts all of the line items into a negative amount. So we're going to return everything by default. And let's say the customer says, you know, I want to return the dog food and the flea collar, but not the book. So we can just select the book and void it, reduce the amount of the refund. I just rang up something that was not in the original sale, and you'll notice that we're saying, hey, look, you can't do this. I'm only letting you return things that you originally bought from us. So then finally, we tender it out. Say we'll put it on our store credit, and we're done. One little improvement we can make here, quite honestly, if I tried to do that again, now we didn't return the book, but it's not going to let me get back to that sale. So if I wanted to return the book, I'd actually have to go back and do one of those ad hoc type returns. So I might have to put in a password. If my store doesn't allow it, I'm sorry, you're out of luck. You just can't return it. You still can use exchanges, by the way. There isn't any security structures like we have with return sales associated with exchanges. So here's that book, and we'll put that on store credit as well. And now we've returned everything. So that is an overview of our fix-up transaction types, post voids, return sales, and exchanges.